Warriors are not born. Warriors are forged in the crucible of adversity. Warriors without fear are warriors without courage. We are men, destroying stigma and stereotypes. We are a band of brothers, because in brotherhood there is strength. Our weapons are strength, empathy, and honesty. We are mental health warriors, and this is our voice.
At this point, you're probably saying to yourself, how can I support these guys? Because I love the Mental Health Warriors podcast so much, which is a coincidence because I'm sitting here thinking, man, I should really tell people about how they can support the show. So there's 3 ways to do it. The simplest and easiest is to share our episodes. So if you connect deeply with what you're hearing, or you know that there's someone in your life that could benefit from the things that we're talking about, share our episode with them. It's a gift to them and it's a gift to us. All you need to do is press share on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It doesn't matter, but every share helps us spread our message. The second thing is to become a supporter of the show. So navigate on over to patreon.com and pledge to support us per episode. It might be $1, it might be $2. We appreciate everything. And you can cap it per month. So if we get crazy and start releasing episodes every day and a half, you don't have to worry about that. And if you start to think that we suck and we're not worthy of your financial support, you can cancel your support at any time. And the last thing is, leave us a review and rating on iTunes. That helps people find our podcast, and that helps us help more people, and that is the reason we're doing this. So thank you so much for your support. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Here we go. I loved this conversation, and it's because it gets to a very powerful truth with a very simple question. Jordan Axani asks, what is your big lie? Come on. I know you have one, or probably more than one, because we all do. But we don't share those lies because if people knew them, it would pierce the veil of our perfection. People might understand or that we don't have our shit together. Maybe we're not the captains of our own destiny like we like to pretend, that things have happened to us, that we've made mistakes, that we failed, that we struggle with things that we don't want people to know. But as long as people don't know that, we can pretend like we all have it together. But God, what does that actually create? It creates superficial relationships that are based on things that are not real. It creates fear. It creates fear that if people ever found out that they would not like us, that they would reject us. And it creates a sense of disconnection. And I'm really starting to appreciate how much human connection, how many things human connection is the antidote for. So I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation because Jordan is doing something incredible. Well, this guy's like an uber entrepreneur that's doing a million different things. But one of the things that he's doing that we talked about in the show is he's going around to school and he's giving students a safe place to answer that question. What is your big lie? And man, wait till you hear the things we talk about and the experiences he's had and what people have actually shared. He's developed a platform where people can share this stuff anonymously in real time, and then they can use that to facilitate discussion. And man, it is beautiful. This guy is a powerhouse entrepreneur. He is an incredible public speaker who's spoken to like 100,000 people last year. But most importantly of all, he's an amazing human being. And I loved this conversation. So I hope you enjoy it as well. Sit down, buckle up, and enjoy the ride with Jordan. All right, Jordan, thank you so much for being on the Mental Health Warriors podcast, man. It's an honor to have you. We've talked before, and we were just talking a little bit before we started recording, and I know this is going to be a huge value to our audience. So thanks again for being here, man.
Oh, my pleasure, dude. Thanks for thinking of me. And I have to say, now that I'm hearing you on this microphone, you have a really good voice for podcasting.
Well, I think it's because I bought an expensive microphone that my wife is not too happy about. But as long as it makes my voice sound good, that can be my selling pitch to her.
Well, that's like half the battle with these things, right? Like you hear from people all the time that are starting at podcasts, and then you like get them on microphone, and it's like nails on a chalkboard. But no, you're like what am I looking for? You're like the Teflon. It's like so smooth.
Well, there you go. I was saying on the Jeff's episode that his job as a technical guy is to take my voice, which is dripping with masculinity and sexuality, and toning it down to a level that most people can, relate to and understand.
Perfect.
Yeah.
The prepubescent Jason would be great if at all possible.
That's right. So, hey, let's get right into it, man. So, what is courageous educational programming?
Oh boy. So that is the one of the taglines that we've been testing out for one of my businesses. In So we're here in July now. In January of this year, I took over a speaking agency that was representing me, which was as awkward as it sounds. I mean, I ended up working with one group out of Toronto here called Disrupt. And Disrupt focused heavily on the US college market, bringing a lot of mental health, social innovation programs to different colleges and universities. And of course, in the US, that's a massive market. But when I took over the agency, a lot of things changed very quickly. And to backstep a couple of months before that, I was the second, if not the busiest person on the roster. And I already had my own team to support my own programs and everything else. So when the company came up for sale, we jumped on it pretty quick and decided we were going to go in. But what we were going to do is, rather than just treat it like a speaking agency, we were going to focus on how to create scalable educational programs around all the stuff that we were working on anyway. So rather than just having like a mental health keynote or workshop, why not build that into like curriculum, tools, broader materials that can be used in classrooms and in student centers, in order to answer your question, in order to hopefully encourage students to be a little bit more courageous about how they're feeling day to day.
That's fantastic. So, when you say courageous, what does that mean to you? Or what does it mean to the students?
Well, to me, it means the ability to be truthful with yourself and not necessarily shy away from the positive and the negative things that invariably go on in all of our minds. In the minds of the students, I think it's a bit of a black box. And to be honest, I think we're actually going to end up shifting out the slogan because the concept of courage to the generation sort of younger than myself is seems to be like, I don't want to say lacking, but there seems to be a lot of confusion around it. Like a lot of people interpret courage as doing something like wildly bold and ambitious and like out there. Whereas we see it in more of an everyday kind of way. So it's funny because I think one of the things, to bring it to mental health, I think one of the things that we often struggle with is I think two things. One, admitting that, we all got something. That's the reality of the situation. But secondly, that sometimes it's not about like these big, grander gestures of like being bold or brave or courageous or whatever the word is to stand up and say, hey, here's what I'm going through, but rather just the more casual, passive act of admitting to ourselves and being honest with ourselves what's going on inside. And I find the latter to be frankly like the way bigger challenge facing schools. I mean, like I spend a lot of time with kids, as I know you do too, Jason, and it's astounding how challenging it is for many of us and again many people younger than myself to be able to identify the emotions that are going on. And so what happens when we don't identify them is it just feels like this tornado, this fog. Do you know what I mean? Do you see that in your own kids or in some of the kids in your community?
Well, I see that, it's funny you say that because I see that in myself, actually,
Yep.
probably. And for me, the way I talk a lot about vulnerability, and I mean, I wrote a book about it, but the way I kind of came to describe it was having the courage to look yourself in the mirror and be honest and without judgment about who you see staring back at you. And for me personally, that was one of the biggest challenges that I have ever overcome. I ran from that, from just telling myself the truth, for years and for a lot of my life. And for me at the moment, one of my most profound moments, you know, what I got out of being able to do that is look in the mirror and be honest was, that I drink every day,
Mm-hmm.
that I am causing my wife a whole bunch of concern and worry and grief, and that my kids are now telling me they're disappointed in me, and I'm not the father that I'm pretending to be. And those kind of four things, being able to admit that to myself, holy God, was that ever liberating, man. But
How long ago was that you did that?
almost 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it was that would be the moments leading up to that were my lowest point, with my daughter telling me, my 9-year-old daughter looking my drunk ass in the face and telling me she was disappointed in me. And
Wow.
so you're right. I totally agree with what you're saying. That took a tremendous amount of courage. for me to be able to do that. And once I finally did that, everything changed, right? Because
Totally.
once I owned it, then I became able to move past it. And once I started to or work through it, and so as I started to work through it, I started to be able to talk about it. And man, that's really really powerful, right? When you can own your story and share it.
Oh yeah, I mean, and 'cause immediately it does. I mean, it does a bunch of things, but one of the biggest things is it normalizes it. I mean, like the fact is, like there are a lot of men out there, like you were 3 years ago, and just like I was a year ago, even. I mean, like it's everywhere, but we don't treat it that way. And until we're able to come forward and share it with one person, and two people, and three people, and just own it for better or for worse, and understand that ultimately it doesn't really impact, at the end of the day, it really doesn't change who we are. Like a good buddy of mine, Drew Dudley, who would be an amazing guest for this show. I'll have to make an intro. He does a lot of speaking around leadership. He's super, super successful. I mean, like probably he has like two of the top 20 TED Talks in the
Oh,
world.
I've seen it.
That yeah, is, yeah.
He's got that
lollipop moment.
Yeah, that like 6 or 7 minute one is just incredible.
Just crushes it, right? And and Drew has only gotten better since then. But he's very open and honest about it. But he's in AA. He's a recovering alcoholic, and he has bipolar. And he has this saying, which is something to the effect of, "We're not who we are in our worst moment." And I think it's so easy to forget that, and that's the problem when we're so scared to look at these things in the face, because it's just it's so difficult for us to be able to invent another reality, and function within that reality where we just like live in this fictional, I don't know, like self-rationalized swamp of crap. Like no wonder we crack, man. Staring that stuff in the face is everything. And I guess my mission with a lot of the courageous educational programming is encourage kids and young adults and adults as well to be able to look at this stuff for what it is, in a very different way. Because I find a lot of the conversation around mental health right now is very counterproductive in achieving that.
So why do you think it's counterproductive? That's interesting. I tend to agree with you.
So this may be a little controversial, and that's okay. I'm used to that. But I mean, the conversation around stigma is really bullshit. It's bullshit because it distracts from the broader implication of what's going on. So, like, look, awareness is important, but awareness is not the issue anymore. I mean, like, we have an immense amount of awareness around mental health challenges in the Western world, and the fact that we're still having that conversation is so dated in and of itself. What's happened with the dialogue around mental health in Canada and the U.S. Is that so many young people and old people feel alienated from their ability to address, to self-diagnose, self-care, and fucking feel. Because, like, for example, let me give you a really concrete example. In the last year, I've spoken to about 100,000 people, and that's just with the What's Your Big Lie program, and we'll probably get into that in a couple minutes. But one of the things that shocked me to no end is how many people come up to me after these presentations and they say, look, I don't feel safe to tell the people around me about how I'm doing. And I'll say, well, do you have anyone that you trust? Yes, I do. Have you ever spoken to a counselor? Well, I've tried once. Okay, so what's stopping you from voicing how you're doing to someone you trust or a counselor in your school? And the answer is consistently different articulations of a fear of, like, almost imposter syndrome around our own mental health. It's like, well, who am I to feel bad? I don't trust how I feel. I don't know. Who am I? I have to be professionally diagnosed just to know that I'm fucking sad. Mm-hmm. That's what I hear over and over again. There's this sense, it's like almost like Marxism in like mental health. It's like we feel alienated from the labor of our minds in a way. And then what drives me nuts on the flip side, not to turn this into a rant, but what drives me nuts on the flip side is that then we have this very bizarre insular discussion within the mental health community and among mental health leads in school boards and among mental health professionals, which constantly prevents a broader sense that perhaps maybe simply voicing what's going on to someone we trust will actually lead to tangible benefit.
Oh my God, you're preaching to the choir. I'm going to go on a rant when you're done here.
I love it because it's just, Look, I'm the first person to say there are many people. I mean, everyone would benefit from therapy every week, right? I kind of believe the world would be a wonderful place if we all had that opportunity. The reality is that we don't. The reality is that I go to many communities where there's so much pain that the institutions around us cannot service it. Like, dude, I was at a university speaking in Utah like a month or two ago, and so far in the semester, I guess this was 3 months. This was back in March. I was down there. So far in that semester, so less than 2 months, there was 4 completed suicides in a school of 20,000. You want to tell me that everything's hunky-dory there? And moreover, the counseling department, they're doing everything they can. They're booked up for months. There's not an opening at all. And then instead of encouraging students to go and seek help outside the school, they're told to go on a wait list. Or instead of being referred to a phone support system through their insurance provider, they are told just to hold on, it won't be that long. We're not giving people the tools to take care of their everyday mental health, and I think it's a fucking travesty. And we do it because there's way too much fear in the system that should we talk about what's going on, that people are going to be triggered and start killing themselves. Well, guess what? It's happening fucking anyway.
Yeah, man. It's amazing. It's amazing what you say, because the way I always describe awareness, that fucking word drives me crazy. And
Yes.
and I always say it's a euphemism for just hoping someone else will do something about this shit. Like, how can you not be aware, right? We're all aware. We're just
Yes.
so and I think it's you know awareness doesn't create action. Action creates awareness, right? So just fucking do something. So when I talk in front of groups and I'm talking about mental health issues, what I always say is that, you know, here's my challenge to you. You want to eliminate stigma? We could just stigma. I don't like that word either, but you
Yeah.
want to eliminate it. Here's what we need to do. I want somebody in this audience to stand up right now and have the courage to say, my name is so and so. If you're struggling, I want you to know that I have struggled too. And if you ever want to talk to me, I will not judge you. If everybody in this room did that, then there wouldn't be any stigma. So who's going to
Totally.
stand the fuck up and do that?
Well, it's way easier just to change our Facebook photo one day of fucking year, isn't it? To the Bell Let's Talk thing. Like, I mean, dude, this is the insanity of all of this. Is that we talk ourselves in circles. We throw money at charities, yet, man, the amount of people that I've met, and for the purposes of this audience, because I mean, your audience on this show is going to be mostly adults. Don't think I just work with kids. I work with people of all ages, from grade 4 up to people in their 70s. And in the adult segment, I mean, the amount of adults that I meet that are suffering in immense silence to the point where they don't even identify that they are suffering is astounding to me. Like, I started doing a bunch of work with the RCMP last year. This fucking huge, awesome guy picks me up before a speaking event from the RCMP. He's on their prevention task force. This guy named Al out in Cranbrook, British Columbia, picks me up at the airport, and we sit down for dinner. He said, "Hey, Jordan, you like talking about the lies we're living?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "How about my whole fucking life?" And he told me this story about how being in uniform with the RCMP for 30 years had dissociated himself from himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't know where the uniform began and he ended. It was all the same. And what he lost in the middle of that was the ability to be able to label his emotions, because that's not what you do when you're a cop, right? And I mean, this is one example of a guy that is very high functioning and a guy that is super articulate and is able to label it now. But for every one of Al out there, there's 10,000 people that are suffering immensely. And so, I'm with you, man. Awareness is not the problem. Action is the problem. Consuming media that actually encourages us to be open with the people around us is a massive challenge. Not digitizing our lives and sending out the press release is a massive challenge. But at the end of the day, it's nothing new, really. It's just that we're hurting a lot and we are scared to speak up because of fear. And the fear is not, I'm with you. I don't think the fear is because of any stigma. The fear is because we're afraid of admitting it to ourselves. Not that we're afraid of having someone else come up to us and say, "Hey, I'm not doing so well." We're scared to look in the mirror.
Well, yeah, I agree. And I think it's very difficult for somebody to stand up and say, I will not judge you, if they have not first been able to say, I will not judge myself.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, that's true. Huh? I think one of the things I've never been to an AA meeting, but I really want to go for. There's some meetings that are open, right,
Hmm.
where
Hmm.
you can go in as a friend, and I really want to go to a couple with. I have a couple buddies in AA. I'd love to go and see how they structure such a non-judgmental, supportive environment. Because I think it goes like to there's the AA philosophy that every day is day one, right? Every day is your first day without a drink.
Hmm.
And I think if we treated the conversation around our wellness in a similar way, our wellness more broadly, inclusive of mental health, what a cool thing that would be, right? Because if we just acknowledge that we're human, we hurt, we all have messed up thoughts sometimes, and that's okay, and that's just how it is. And our opportunity every day is to have more good thoughts than bad, and treat it almost like a game, similar to not taking a drink today. At least that would give us a structure to work with here that we could take some action from. And when we're in that mindset as well, too, imagine how amazingly supportive and open we'd be to others. But instead, we're just like paralyzed.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I look at that when I think of the mental health warriors group that we've created. In a way, I'm thrilled because of what's happening in that group. It's beautiful to see what's happening in there because guys know that it's safe. But on one and but to me, it's this is just a first step because in order to get guys to come into this group, it's got to be secret. It's a secret Facebook group, so nobody can see who's in it. And we have a vetting process to make sure the right people are getting in.
Right.
And so that's how it has to be right now, but that's
Yep.
not how I want it to have to be long term because I want this just to be a part of our regular conversation because I think what we do is I had a really interesting conversation with somebody who said actually it was the woman on the podcast we released today, but she said, we're a nation of a society or culture of producers and consumers, and when people cannot produce the way that we expect they're supposed to be, we pathologize that lack of production, right? As a
Mm.
mental health issue, or so there's something wrong that needs to be treated and medicated, or and I just thought that was a really powerful way of looking at it. I kind of think it might be true.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. Yeah. And I mean, when thinking about the concept of the closed group in that light is really interesting because what you're doing is you're playing to the hand of things that men have already gravitated towards over time. I mean, we've had like the secret societies of like what is it, like the Stone Shakers or whatever, like for ages.
Hmm.
And if we create those spaces where men would naturally be attracted only to dig into the subject matter, I think that's actually a really smart thing to do. Like broadly speaking, one of my fears as a white guy is that white men have been largely left behind from emotional development because of ourselves. I know when I look at the people that are hurting as adults, I mean, a lot. Of course, we're all hurting in our own ways, but I see like I'm seeing a very scary trend among men because there aren't enough because it's not yet enough of a normal cultural thing to have that level of vulnerability and honesty be out in the open. And where it currently exists is in tribes like yours, which is awesome. Um, and that plays a very important stepping stone role, as you're saying. And I mean, I wonder what happens like 5 years from now. What happens from 10 years from now? Um, I don't know. I don't know, and I don't think I don't think that it's going to. I'm not saying that it has to be like a huge public movement of like, but maybe that would be good. I just don't know. I mean, I just have so many questions about how these steps ultimately line up because let's face it, we've never really dealt with this before as a culture.
Yeah, you're right. And I think it's a good question what happens 5 or 10 years from now, because what I see over and over again is that as soon as guys, and whether it's in a Facebook community or whether it's in a mastermind group or whether it's in a one-on-one conversation with people, and I'm sure you've seen this too, is once people realize that it is a safe, that you are a safe person or they are in a safe place, it is crazy how fast they drop the mask that they have been carrying around their whole life. Nobody wants to be wearing that mask. I mean, ultimately, we all want to be accepted for who we truly are. And when people realize that, they can be that person, or at least even start the journey of discovering who that person is because they've never admitted it themselves, it's absolutely a beautiful thing to see happen.
Yeah, I think, and it's so. here's I think the challenge for people like you and I in doing what we're doing. I think it's like about how can we manufacture situations where those masks come down as quickly as possible. And I think the closed network mastermind is a great way to do that. I've definitely experienced that myself, as you alluded. I think the next level of that is in a lot of the work that groups like ours are doing, but many others as well too, where you have larger scale public events that encourage that kind of trust and openness among a random group of people.
Mm-hmm.
And then beyond that, to your comment just before we started recording here about, starting to work with more businesses on creating and tweaking their culture around mental wellness and mental health. I mean, those are the next frontiers, right? Like anytime we have these collection of people coming together, I think it's on people like us to ask constantly, well, how can we break through quicker and more effective and as much as possible in a safe way? But I mean, there's always the old slogan. I'm sure you've heard it from people in the industry. You got to program mental health programming for the most vulnerable person in the room. But you know as well as I do, no one knows who the most vulnerable person in the room is. So
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think sometimes too, one of the things I'm pretty passionate about, and I love your input on this, but
sure.
I feel like what companies do sometimes is they focus so narrowly on the mental health aspect of it that it can be it might not resonate with people in the broader organization. So in other words, I think that the kind of culture that creates human connection and drives human performance, and where people care personally about one another at work, like that kind of leadership that creates that kind of culture also creates the culture where people who are dealing with mental health issues will feel accepted and supported and connected with people. Like they're not, so you know there you can the same concepts that drive that kind of acceptance for people with mental health issues also drive better business performance. They're not mutually exclusive propositions. So I think there's an opportunity to talk to businesses about that. Like what kind of leadership or what kind of culture is the leadership in this organization creating, and how can we make it more connected and human and relational?
Yeah, and I mean, and this is where I think someone like yourself can do so much good in the industry as well too, because you're an outsider you're not a trained mental health professional, right? As far as I know.
No.
And I think this is you bringing that perspective, from your perspective as someone who has lived with this and as someone with a huge amount of professional and relationship acumen. I think exactly. I think we can focus on more the everyday things that just bring us together. Because I mean, having an insurance program that delivers workshops in the workplace or provides help when you're in crisis, I mean, that's great. But the amount of people that take advantage of that is so little, I'm sure, relative to those that have the access to it. So I'm with you. How can we just enhance those human relationships every day? And honestly, like I think it's I mean, you probably agree with me, it's so much more simple than I think we make it out to be. Like what if we just started asking meaningful questions in our team meetings about how people were doing? What if we took the extra 20 minutes to do it like a check-in every Friday with what was the biggest challenge that kept you up at night this week? What if we started asking about, how are things going at home, and instead of pretending like whatever's going on at home doesn't make an impact on the workplace? Like that's not only how you bring people together, that's also how you drive employee retention, arguably increase productivity in the workplace. And overall, I think it's just how you treat people as human beings. But our industrial and corporate environments haven't allowed for that level of openness for a very, very long time. I mean, like until about 4 years ago, I was working in real estate development. And I mean, it was a small firm, but I got to tell you, like that whole industry, which is, of course, a massive industry, they don't give a shit about how anyone's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I ended up in the entertainment industry, people care even less. I mean, it's lunacy. So my question to you would be like, what would that look like? Like, what would the first couple steps for, say, a mid-sized Canadian company that's predominantly, say, white collar, what would they do if you had your way with them?
Well, that's a great question. I think part of it is for leaders in the company. I mean, we'll say talk on a leadership level. I think is to go through some do some work to develop some self-awareness, right? To develop the courage to be vulnerable and honest with themselves, and then try to understand how that could translate into helping their employees, and then by extension helping the business. So I'll give you a quick example. Like, I had a guy walk into my office, I think 2 years ago. He's on my team, and this guy was white as a ghost, and I felt like something had been up with him, and I had asked him about it. And so he comes into my office, he closes the door, and he goes, "Look, man, I do not really want to have this conversation, but my wife is making me talk to you because she reads all of the stuff that you write online. And she told me, you have got to talk. You have the best boss in the world to talk about this with, so go talk to him."
Amazing.
Yeah, and he proceeded to tell me how for most of his adult life he's dealt with like really, really bad depression. And I'm not a counselor. I didn't really have a therapeutic path for him. But what I did have was a non-judgmental, open door for him to walk in. And we talked for over 2 hours that morning. And when he walked out of there, I guess, not only was that conversation good for both our humanity, but what do you think that guy after that was like as an employee? Do you think he would run through a wall for me?
Yeah.
Do you think
he would crush it?
Yeah. Do you think he would ever have a concern about, telling me that he was struggling to meet a deadline on a project? He just told me the most deeply personal thing that he is struggling with. So you know what I mean? So that to me, that's what it's all about. And I think part of what contributes to the issue is how we as tend to quantify the costs of mental health issues, right? Because we tend to look at it as, if you have better mental health programming or whatever, it's a cost avoidance measure. The cost of your benefits will go down. The cost of absenteeism will go down. But I think it's different. I think it's more like, how do you measure the productivity of a fully engaged team that care about each other as human beings? You will get more units of whatever the work you need to do is out of every single person. That's what you should be measuring.
Totally.
Right?
I mean, did you see that Google study that came out, I think, either a year or two ago, about the importance of psychological safety on their teams?
No.
Okay, so you got to look this up. It's fascinating. Maybe put it in the show notes too, because it's amazing. But Google effectively did this 2-year study to figure out what was the most important drivers in team performance, and they did it. They basically have this team of researchers that just works on internal research, and so they assigned like 5 people to this project for 2 years. Guess what was number one, far and away? Psychological safety. Teams where their employees felt like they could be open and honest with each other, where they didn't fear shame or rejection, where they were willing to throw out ideas, were far more creative, were far more engaged, were far more productive, and had far more retention. Like that says it all, right? And so the thing about a concept like psychological safety, it sounds really fancy, and people say, "Oh, wow, psychological safety, I should really hire a psychologist." Like, no, fuck. You just talk to people like they're human, and you get to know them, and you do exactly what you just demonstrated. You care a little bit. You ask them what's going on. You help people feel safe. And that's the biggest thing. And I would also, I don't have any data to back this up, but I bet if there were more managers like you out there, what it would also do, Jason, is support people in when they need it, escalating to the point where they're seeing a therapist or a counselor or whatever. Because one of the other trends that I'm seeing, and there is a lot of data to back this point up, but one of the biggest things I'm seeing across all ages is that there is a huge gap in services between like the point in time where we're like, "Oh man, I'm not feeling so good," to where we actually reach out for formal support and help. Like, there's a lot that happens in between there, and we don't talk about it. We don't design programs or any sort of initiatives around it. It's really either like nothing or, "Holy shit, I'm going to kill myself. I have to go, call the crisis line right now." And that's a huge, huge problem. And I think workplaces can help people take advantage of, frankly, programs and tools that more often than not they have through their insurance providers, simply by their managers leaning in a little bit more and asking how they're doing. What's going on? You can tell me these things. I want to know.
Yeah. And I think that starts with the leadership going first.
Yep.
Right. Like
Totally.
I can remember I can remember I was working in this automotive plant, huge plant, gigantic presses up and down, and standing behind this press, screaming in this guy's face about how I used to have a drinking problem, and because he had a drinking problem, and us having this amazingly uh, personal and authentic conversation, and we were basically screaming in each other's face because it was so loud. I mean, so it can happen anywhere. You don't have to have this perfect set of conditions. You can take the initiative and make it happen anywhere, but you just have to have a little bit of courage. And I think that's one of the big problems, right? Is we all have this fear. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. We all have this fear of judgment, of the judgment of other people. And again, obviously that goes back to the fact that, we're afraid of other people judging us for what we're already judging ourselves about. But what I found is, I mean, I've had so few people say anything to me that's even remotely negative and I've been pretty open about all the mistakes that I've made, the things that I've done, and all that kind of stuff. And it's been just so overwhelmingly positive, and it's like a way of taking what you've always considered to be your greatest weakness or source of shame and turning that just by sharing into the source of your greatest contribution.
Mm, that was very well put. I mean, look, I think judgment is an articulation of fear, of course. It is projection, right? And I think because of that, I think it's almost implausible. I think as we move towards this greater understanding and the greater understanding and greater willingness to disclose how we're actually doing, I think it's almost unfathomable that in the future anyone would ever think less of you for being real. And in a weird way, I think we're getting to that point because we're so fed up with the BS. And of course, social media, I think, has done a lot to get us to this point where we're just, we're seeking reality, we're seeking vulnerability, we're seeking something that we can actually sink our teeth into from each other. I mean, I see this with kids, and I mean, kids are our future. Like when I go into a class and I give them the opportunity to share what's really going on in their lives anonymously using technology, so that they don't have that fear of shame, they jump at the opportunity, right? And then as soon as they see that their peers are receptive to the things that are being shared, they are then willing to do it without technology and willing to get in front of their class and say, hey, you guys know me as this person, this grade 8 student, but here's what you don't know about me. Here's the big lie that I'm living. And to have people embrace each other on that front has been amazing. So look, I think it's actually, in a very weird way, I think our initial, call it 15 years fumbling around with social media, trying to understand how it impacts our psychology, I think it's coming to a head where my hope is in the next 5 to 10 years or even less, that we are craving like this kind of honesty and openness and vulnerability so that it's just everywhere. But then it begs the question of like, well, is that actually going to be legit vulnerability and openness, or are people going to start saying things to score points? And I already see this actually in some entrepreneurial circles that I'm part of. I see people kind of, you've probably seen this, Jason, where it's like people sort of share like half vulnerabilities, right? Like they sort of glaze over a lot of like the underlying things and say, I had this big falling down because my business tanked, whatever, blah, 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 it got really dark, but now I'm back, baby. And they tell the story just kind of like this, like very instant right turn. And they're doing that because they're starting to, of course, be more truthful about the pain that they're experiencing and the fear that they're experiencing, but they're not there yet. And I've met some people that are keenly attuned to this and know that since it's something that's becoming widely accepted and even respected, that they should be doing it as well. So it's kind of scary and a bit of a double-edged sword, just like anything else. But I mean, I think the onus is on many of us, again, just to try to just be honest and not really be too terribly concerned about what reactions might be, and then hope that over time this continues to snowball in a I don't know. I want to say it's snowball in an effective way, but what does that even mean in this case? I mean, I think all we can really do at the end of the day is hope to lead by example. I think it's that easy. And then whatever happens down the line, we'll address it then. It's going to be imperfect, but it's certainly better than how we've been living.
No, I agree. And it's funny because I think that, oh my God, I just totally I had a great point I wanted to make, and I just totally lost my train of thought. So why don't we go into, you mentioned your biggest lie. Why don't we talk about that? Because I think that's such a powerful, just a powerful program that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So this is, I mean, it was a crapshoot, right? This was all an accident. I want to preface this story by stressing that I got a call one day through a speaking agency I was working with. I still work with them, Speaker Spotlight. Even though I own my own agency, which is weird. But anyway, they're wonderful people. And they hooked me up with the RCMP. And the RCMP was looking to do a program that would give students a way to be able to talk about their self-worth. And that was really about the extent of what they knew they wanted to accomplish. They sort of said, look, a lot of the prevention stuff that we're doing in rural communities ain't working. And remember, we're sitting here in Ontario, but like on the west coast of Canada, I mean, it's like RCMP has all the local policing contracts. Like they're everywhere, right? So they're in these rural communities that are rather hard done by. And they said, alcohol, drug abuse is through the roof, teen pregnancy is through the roof. We're seeing record rates of self-harm. What we're doing isn't working. We got to start having deeper discussions, because what we're doing is we're addressing the outcomes, but we're not really addressing the core issue of whatever's going on. And so they kind of gave me a lot of leeway. They said, how would you tackle this? And I sat on it for a week or two, and I ended up writing this proposal for this thing that it was one of those things where it just sort of came out of me. I didn't really think about it too much, but I called the program "What's Your Big Lie?" And I began my note to them and said, look, guys, I think if we're all really honest, we can all say that we're all living a lie. And this idea of a big lie, I think it captures something that's pretty timely, because, mental illness or no mental illness, I think we're all guilty of putting masks on right now. And it's really important to start to give nomenclature to that state in a way that kids will understand. So I said, let's call the program "What's Your Big Lie?" And then let's meet kids where they're at. Let's not have like a boring keynote or like some sharing circle where no one's going to want to partake. Let's build an anonymous platform that students could access from their phones that won't record any information about their device, no device ID, no phone number, none of that shit. And during the presentation, we can ask the students questions about what's going on in their life, and they can submit from their phones without the fear of anything, without the fear of shame, without the fear of embarrassment, without the fear of getting in trouble. And I really didn't know what they were going to say. And it was like 5 minutes later, I got an email back from the head guy that was bringing me in, and he said, "Sounds awesome. Let's do it." And
Wow.
3 weeks later, I was standing in front of a group of 500 grade 7 students in British Columbia. So here's where I'm going to be really honest. Again, I had no idea if this was going to work or not. This was a pretty wild pipe dream, even from my I mean, Jason, you know enough about me to know that I have a weird habit of doing really bizarre things that make very little sense. And even for me, this was uncomfortable. But I ended up in front of these 500 students, and I ended up going into this idea of what a big lie is. And I told my story of what I thought mine was. And I said, I want to know what yours are, guys. Come on, tell me, take out your phones, and all you got to do is just go here and just submit it. And this is what it's going to look like. I gave them sort of a screen caption. I went to the next screen and showed an example of what it would look like. I said, look, your phone number's not on here. There's nothing. Just, you can be honest. Just hide your screen from the people sitting next to you and write whatever you want. And so I asked them, what's your big lie? What lie are you living? And within seconds, I mean, we had an 80% response rate in the room. Almost all of it was really hearty, meaningful stuff. And it was things like, my mom's addicted to blow. My sister's pregnant and she hasn't told anyone. I wanted to kill myself this morning. I hate who I've become. I mean, it just goes on and on. And these
So
are
let me ask you a question before you go on.
Yeah, sure.
When you're in that moment,
Yep.
and you are in the first time you are testing this idea, what does it feel like to see
man.
what happened, man?
Dude, I felt like I invented the nuclear bomb for a second. If I'm being really honest, it was this.
Yeah.
It was this mix of awe that I was working on. Holy crap, they're actually responding, and we're actually getting amazing stuff. And then that quickly turned to this sense of, oh shit, like, what have we done?
Yeah.
And I know that was also the sense of all the teachers and guidance counselors in the room as well too. And I mean, this is why you can imagine why I get in so many fights with school boards. So here, I'll tell you the end of this story, and I'll tell you a little tidbit afterwards that explains where we're at today with this. So we end up going through this, and everything's just so honest and vulnerable and incredible. And I have students come up and they're reading some of the submissions that they've seen on the screen aloud, and I'm diving into some of them. For anyone that's talking about self-harm, I was addressing it head on and saying, look, guys, all I want you to know is whoever wrote this in this room right now, I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that you're here sitting with us. I'm glad you didn't do that. It matters that you're here. And then at the end, these were like 90-minute sessions. And I mean, like, no keynote should be 90 minutes unless you're like, I don't know, like Obama or something. And so at the end of it, I had 20 minutes and I can only tap dance so well. And I got this crazy idea that I was going to say to the audience, hey guys, does anyone want to come up and share a little bit of what they've experienced? And at this point, we had gone through 2 or 3 questions. Typically, I ask, what's your big lie? How do you remind yourself you matter in your darkest moments? And then I have a bunch of others I asked too, but those were sort of the big 2 ones. So we had already sort of put a nice bow on this thing. We already seen messages of affirmation that no matter how hard it gets, that we're all fighters. But then I asked, would anyone like to come forward? And you know how this is as a speaker. It's like, yeah, you make a crazy ask. It's like crickets.
Oh, yeah.
You're thinking in your head, okay, I'll give it a couple more seconds. Counting to 10 at like
Sweating, you're starting to sweat.
Totally. And at 9 seconds, I see like this hand go up in the back corner of the room. And I'm like, is that someone? Is that a hand? And then the hand goes down and then it like snakes back up a second later. And this girl comes up to the front of the room with this like ridiculous look of, not ridiculous as in hilarious, but like ridiculously powerful and amazing look of conviction in her eyes. And she comes up to the front of the room. And I'm looking at her being like, oh shit, someone actually responded to this. What is going to happen now? I'm already in like an infinite amount of trouble, I'm sure. And the keynote hasn't even ended yet. And I whispered to her, I'm like, you sure you want to tell everyone the lie you're living and how you doing? And she's like, yeah. And she grabs the microphone. And I have the audio recorded and I don't really show it widely, but I've shown it to some people. And it is like 2 minutes of the most powerful. It's some of the most powerful audio I've ever heard. She effectively goes on into it and says, look, I'm living this lie because when I was very young, a friend of my parents made me sexually assault 2 of my best friends. And I haven't told anyone, and we moved. And long story short, she tried to tell her family that this happened later in life, and they actually ridiculed her about it and said, no, that's insane. That would have never happened. And she tried to tell her friends, and they ridiculed her as well and said, you're crazy. That never happened. And she decided that the only solution was to kill herself. She's in grade 7. Okay. And she goes through this narrative to her being there and realizing that if she left, if she killed herself, then the people that need her parents, would leave too. And that's why she couldn't. And she's doing this in front of 500 kids her age from like 11 different schools. And all you hear on the recording is this thunderous standing ovation that goes on for a couple minutes.
I'm starting to cry right now, man.
Dude, it's all these sessions recorded. So I have like hundreds. So this happens and it's just a thing of beauty. And like, it's terrifying, but it's beautiful. And then 5 more people come up after her and just like drop bombs just like that. At the end of it, I run up to her and like have a guidance counselor in tow. Like, I'm well aware that I'm going to get in a huge amount of trouble from like the superintendent. And I run up to her and I look at her, I'm like, oh my God, how was that? Oh, you're so brave. That was incredible. And she's like, yeah. And I just have verbal diarrhea. I'm just going like, how are you feeling? Like, what's going on in your mind? And she looks at me dead in the eye and she says, today was the first time in my life I was validated. And that's it, man. I mean, that moment has been recreated hundreds of times. And it doesn't matter where I go or who's in the audience. I've done this with students as young as grade 4. And like I said earlier, up to people that are in their 70s now. Everyone's living a lie that we don't talk about. And the second that we put words to it, it's a game changer because not only do we realize that we're not alone, but we realize that maybe by speaking out, we actually become a leader in a way that we never thought possible around something that's so painful that we never thought would be a positive thing. And that maybe, we're not our lie. Maybe we're more than that scary version of ourselves. So, and let me wrap up that story by telling you this. So I did 6 of those presentations in 3 days, and this was a little over a year ago, and the program's blown up immensely since, which is awesome. But I run into this dialogue all the time, and I just did a TED talk about this, and I got really angry during it. So I think it was after the second or third presentation, I had this principal come up to me and tell me that everything I was doing was bullshit because there was no way that's how the students felt. And that I had all these submissions pre-written, or I had like my buddies back in Toronto just copy and pasting sad stuff, but there was no chance. That's not how my kids feel. No way.
Are you fucking serious?
And I get that all the fucking time. All the time. And I'm going to be, I don't really care who's listening to your podcast. This is important. The biggest enemy I have with this is actually the unions. The unions that are teaching our children are fucking this up royally, because the second you start to take the lid off this shit, then the teachers have to act and do something with it. And everyone looks at this as a capacity issue. Oh my God, if we start having these conversations at school, first of all, this isn't our place to have those conversations. That's the first thing I hear, to which I say, fuck you, you're raising our next generation. It absolutely is. The second thing I hear is, well, if we start having these conversations, our teachers aren't equipped to deal with it, to which I say, stop thinking about it from a technical, traditional background, or from your traditional perspective. All you have to do is listen to these kids and redirect them to community resources or resources within your school, which already exist. And third of all, they say, this is going to just create more work for us. This is going to cause more hours. To which I say, then maybe cut back on the intramural fucking volleyball team. I mean, like, this is so much more important than almost anything imaginable, yet we are dancing around it. And I see this resistance everywhere. There are some school boards, some major Canadian and American school boards that we are banned from without even having the program in their schools. Not because it's a bad program, but because they are afraid that the teachers will revolt. So whose best interest is first year? Huh? Like, it frustrates me to no end. So if we aren't willing to have these vulnerable conversations in our public education system, who is?
And aren't these fucking people parents too?
Yes. And they're scared. I mean, I also do sessions with parents, and we also do a lot of teacher training now, coincidentally. But I mean, I do sessions with parents, and there's a huge amount of fear. And it's the same. I mean, look, this is the challenge that we have, right? It's like, we know there's a huge amount of pain. I think it goes to your point earlier, right? Like, we understand that we don't need any more awareness shit. We're well aware this is a problem, but the action is scary, because the action means that we're going to get pulled into it, which means that we may have to self-disclose our pain, or it may cause us more time or energy or whatever else. And the unknown is a very scary thing, especially in a unionized environment. I believe that most teachers are fundamentally good, caring people, and that's why they did in the first place. It's not a sly against them. It's just, I think it's lunacy that the system that many teachers operate within is governed with that kind of bullheaded view. Because I see so many bullshit mental health programs go into schools that are not like a tenth of as effective as even just having an honest conversation with kids about how they're doing. Yet we're scared of that. And here's the last thing that'll blow your mind, I think, especially Jason. Like, we do extensive follow-ups with the schools that we're at. Like, we send surveys, we do extra phone calls. Our net promoter score, which is, of course, like everything in the speaking world, is like ridiculously high. But not sorry, that was a bloating thing. But just to say, the program's well respected. But the thing is you would think that there's going to be this landfall of people going into the office and taking up all the counselor support and, like, mauling the guidance counselors. No. You know what people do instead? They talk to their friends. They start to share with their best friend or someone they trust something that's going on. And then over time, we do see a couple more kids reaching out for support in most of the schools that we go to, like in the weeks and months afterwards. But that's a good thing. But we're not shutting down the community available services. We're not triggering. What's more triggering, many studies have shown, is doing nothing. And the way we structure these conversations is in a very thoughtful, intelligent way, to the point, like, we designed this whole curriculum with a therapy clinic, for Christ's sakes, that we have a partnership with. And so I mean, we've done a lot to build goodwill in the school system, and we definitely have goodwill in some areas. I want to make that very clear. We've been very fortunate with many of our academic partners. But I got to tell you, the level of fear of these honest conversations that's out there across North America and Europe is fucking astounding. And that to me is one of the greatest disservices of the next generation. And rant.
Yeah, no kidding. So, do you ever get the feedback? Do you ever have the feeling, or do you ever get pushback from the schools that, you come in, you open this can of worms, and then you're on a plane to the next place, leaving somebody else to deal with the aftermath?
Totally, yeah, dude. I mean, and so what we designed a pretty thoughtful curriculum for homeroom teachers to implement,
Hmm.
to give students space to talk and journal and do a bunch of other things that we found is pretty successful because it's really flexible. But yeah, that's one of the fears, man. I mean, and I don't like it either, for that matter. It's just a reality of the situation. Like
Hmm.
I don't. It drives me nuts some days when I have to leave shortly after a presentation because what will often happen is I'll be mauled by students that want to talk, and if I have the whole day, it's very likely I'll be at that school for the whole day talking to students. And I've had many students share things with me as the first person ever that's heard this, um, that are truly devastating. And my role then is to play connector and make sure that everyone's taken care of. But yeah, I mean that, and this is the problem with the broader mental health system, right? Until we get our day to day, not just the administration, the teachers, but also the student leaders and students themselves, able to have an open dialogue around this stuff, there's always going to be a capacity backlog, right? Because they can't afford, the system's not designed to have someone like me in the school every day blowing kids' minds, and nor would that be productive for that matter either. I mean, I think it's,
Hmm.
we act as a pretty strong catalyst. We hand over a strong curriculum. We stay engaged. We refer the students during and after the presentations to a bunch of community resources and digital resources. Like I talk about this one app, Talk Life, that's amazing for kids at nauseum in these sessions, and kids gravitate towards that. And it's an amazing social network based around mental health principles that's anonymous, where kids can share what's up. And I get so many emails from students being like, thank you. Oh my God, this is helping me. So yeah, I do feel guilty about leaving, but we try our darnest to be able
Hmm.
to leave what we can behind. And the rest is unfortunately going to be up to the leaders of the school.
What's your biggest lie, man?
So my biggest lie is for like 22 years. I I really convinced myself that, the simplest way to put it is that I said I was okay when I wasn't, but it's actually much deeper than that and much more dangerous than that. I actually convinced myself that all the things I was feeling was, not something to be concerned about, even though all the evidence around me pointed to the contrary. I had a really rough upbringing. I was bullied every day for almost a decade. And when I say bullied, I don't mean like gently teased. I mean like I got the shit kicked out of me most days for a lot of those years. Um, and what that does is it did two things. One, it made me really hate myself because that's what I was taught to believe. But the second thing is it made me develop what I call, and I'm not sure if this is the technical term or not, but I call it my rationalization engine. Like I'm able to self-rationalize anything. I'm an amazing chameleon, because it's how I survived, right? I could put on whatever face I had to. And I didn't understand until 2 years ago how much that was hurting me, until I ended up at the end of a viral story you can link to in the session notes. You know it.
I will.
In the end of this crazy viral story, where I realized that I was experiencing, that I had been experiencing for so many years, this very, very intense self-hatred that was self-sabotaging everything I touched, and every relationship I had.
Was that only 2 years ago?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my God.
Ain't that crazy?
Yeah.
2.5.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's so in effect, I mean, my big lie is that for as long as I can remember, man, I haven't been anything close to okay, but I convinced myself that I was how I was. Um, and I mean, the lie evolves now. I mean, I still deal with all this crap, but in a much more constructive way. If I'm being really honest, a lot of what's your big lie is certainly therapeutic to me. It's not my core motivation for doing it, but it is a byproduct. Um, and at the end of the day, I mean, I feel amazingly I think it's such a beautiful thing to take to turn the tone on my rants. I think it's amazing that I sort of stumbled on something just by digging in deep enough, um, that now is being shared by others. And I mean, I just consider it an amazing gift to be able to go around and have these conversations with kids, because I wish I could have had these conversations as a kid. It probably would have saved a lot of pain. Um,
Yeah, no kidding.
yeah.
So how many people are when I hear you talk, I'm thinking about the, sort of the general level of self-awareness of a lot of people. And what I wonder is how many people are living their biggest lie without having a clue that they're actually living it, because I think of myself, and one of the biggest lies I told myself was that the suicide, my first wife's suicide did not impact me.
Sure.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, not that it didn't impact me, but it didn't harm me, that her whole illness and death did not harm me as much as I thought. But my rationalization engine was like a Formula One car,
Totally.
and I just couldn't see through that, And so, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh man. Hmm. I mean, I have an underlying belief that we're all living a big lie. And what I qualify big lie as, just for clarity, is something immense that's shaping how we appear to the exterior world, something immense within us. And I don't mean for it to say that everything we build and everything we are is a massive lie, but I think I bet that if we were to look at the major areas of people's lives, so if we broke it up, say, into, I don't know, I mean, a bunch of psychologists have done this, but like, say we said like relationships, work, romantic relationships, friendships, family, work, relationship with ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. I would bet that most people are living at least a couple pretty big lies simultaneously. However, to your point, I believe most people, I think our generation and how we're living today has made us excellent liars and amazing con artists, where we convince ourselves of anything in order to survive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like most people, when you actually get into it, they wouldn't say I'm living a lie initially, but when you start to explain the feeling of it, they start to understand and say, oh, it's kind of like that thing. Like, I mean, I touched on uniformed officers. I mean, that is a massive growth area for us where we're doing a bunch of work with the RCMP, which is amazing. Um, but I mean, like, think about how many people are in uniform every day. And then you think about how many other people share the same attributes as that. And you start thinking about people in the military, and then you start thinking about unhappy marriages where people stay together, unhappy partnerships, or you start thinking about situations in our lives where a friend or a significant other is emotionally abusive, but we defend them. Or we think about putting lipstick on a really challenging relationship with a child that we have. And it goes and goes and goes, right? I mean, we are so afraid of being honest about the pain that we're feeling that we convince ourselves it doesn't exist, to the point where it takes a lot of therapy and a lot of reflection for us to be able to see that. And to be really honest, I mean, like, I wouldn't have seen that from in myself until I got to the darkest I have ever been, which was I was in a suicidal mess. And I don't want other people to have to go that far. But one thing I think that's driving us to that point is we don't really have much of the language we need to describe the things that are going on inside. Um, and so I can't help but feel like if we can give more of the tools, so that we can be a little bit more self-aware and give language to the things that we're feeling, I can't help but feel like we would feel more comfortable with it. But right now, there's just this paralyzing fear, and it's everywhere.
Yeah, and I think as you're talking, I'm thinking, what is my biggest lie right now? And for me, what I think it is that there's a lot of times, and I'm still realizing this, but there's a lot of times, man, where I'm kind of an emotional mess. And because I I'm still, honestly, pre- I live so much of my life pretending I didn't have any emotions that I'm still learning at
Sure.
44 years old
Yeah.
how to what they are and how to deal with them and how to process them. And I think my biggest lie is I'm pretty open about some stuff, but there's a big part of me that worries, like, if people if people knew some of the shit that went on in my head, how could I possibly, you know, be seen as a leader, or
Totally.
or be able to coach people or be able to speak to people, because there's plenty of times I feel like I don't have my shit together at all, and so I, I think that is something that I deal with a lot.
Yeah, totally, man. And I mean, where you're at right now too, with emerging in this space, like that's, there's a sense of needing to conform to the norm within the industry, the mental health industry more generally, right? Of like, you don't see a lot of therapists and practitioners and mental health leads self-disclosing on a frequent basis, right? Like we still don't see a lot of that. Like the people that are self-disclosing are typically ones sort of on the periphery of the industry. And so we still don't see a lot of leaders coming out and actually talking about how these same things impact them every day. We see the occasional, celebrity or politician or athlete come out and say, "Hey, I've dealt with this. I've been dealing with it," but we don't have many people actually taking us into the depths of it. And I think that's the next chapter of a lot of this. It's one thing to say, "Hey, I have depression," and talk about it. It's another thing to really be honest day to day. Like just once, I would love to see like someone that's pretty well known just use their Twitter feed just to like air out all the nasty shit in their mind. Like the same things that we
Mhm.
have. Like wouldn't that be refreshing? Because the fact that you have those thoughts, Jason, I mean, if we were to look at the traditional industrial complex as we've grown up in it, it would mean that, yeah, you're not a leader because you're not the stone faced guy, right? But in our new world, the world that we're stepping into right now, where vulnerability and openness is a thing that's championed, it's enabling you to be a much greater leader, a much greater coach, a much more effective father and partner, and many other things too. And so, I mean, I get it. I totally get that because I feel like that too a lot of the time. Especially now that, like, I mean, a weird thing happens when you're on stage enough. Like, you sort of like, or like, you kind of have this like imposter syndrome around, like, well, who the hell am I to be on stage
Mhm.
as much? Just like I'm sure sometimes you think, who the hell are you to be on stage as much? And I think all that we can do is just continually lean into it and redefine it for ourselves. And if you can demonstrate at the end of the day that what your honesty and openness is doing is actually providing value to others, that's all that's going to matter. It doesn't really matter about how you got there as long as you're delivering value, which you are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting hearing you talk about the police, because I do work with first responders too, and I was up in at York Region a couple of weeks ago, and I had the opportunity to be a participant in an early pilot of, I don't know if you've heard of Road to Mental Readiness,
I haven't, no.
but so it's a program it's developed in the military, and it's been delivered to like 75,000 military and first responders. But this one was for families. So Road to Mental Readiness for families, and it was really an interesting insight into the current thinking about mental health. Because, I'm not criticizing this in the sense that, like, I give them a lot of credit because what they were looking for was feedback, right? So
Mhm.
it definitely was a very early beta of this program, but it was really interesting because the whole program was centered around, you know how to identify the signs of mental health issues in first responders, and how and targeted towards a family. And then they started talking about stuff like how to set SMART goals and visualization and all this shit. And I was like, I got about 30 minutes into it, or 45 minutes. I'm like, I can't fucking take this anymore. Like, if you want to help people, you got to talk about shit that's real. Okay. Because I've been on the other end of that. So why don't you talk about the difference between guilt and shame?
Yeah.
Why don't you talk about the fact that you're going to do things when you're trying to support this person that you fucking made, like, you make huge mistakes. Okay. You're going to maybe be unfaithful. You're going to scream in their face. You're going to put them down because you're at your wit's end. Or why don't you talk to them about the power of human connection, and why talking about shit is actually important? Because I did not understand that. Like, if you want to actually help people, or ambiguous grief, like, what feelings are you going to have when the person you are married to is not the person that you married? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
those are the things that if you want to help people with deal with a loved one dealing with a mental health issue, talk to them about that shit, man. Because nobody talks about that stuff. Because I'll tell you, when you wake up in the morning and your wife's locked up in a mental institution, and you look at yourself in the mirror and you're hungover and realize that you've been unfaithful to her the night before, it fucking doesn't get much lower than that. And there is no one to talk to about how do you move forward from that point?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, first of all, you are a champ for how fucking honest you are. I love it. Secondly, you were making a very, very important point, and I think we've been dancing around this for the last hour. Is that I know what's missing from how we talk about mental health right now is meeting people where they're actually at, right? And that's what's driving me nuts. To add an asterisk to my rant earlier, this is a problem. Like when we talk about mental health and mental wellness, we don't relate it to the everyday versions of what we live, right? At all. Or the everyday things that happen in our lives, the fuck ups that we make, the pain that we hold in a way that's really actionable. And then we wonder why so many people snap, right? It's because we didn't meet them where they're at.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like we have this. Yeah, it's like when you're in the depths of it, man. That can be pretty dark.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes you got to step in the darkness with people to grab them by the hand and help them move towards the light. I just made that analogy up right now. But.
No, that's really good. That's really good. I look forward to seeing it on motivational poster soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, man. I mean, that's absolutely it. That's absolutely it. And and that's why I really, I think your work in the corporate world is so important because of that. I think, especially working in, like different industries that are, how do I say this? There's some industries that have been very quick to, adapt relative to others. But the vast majority of our corporate structures are where so many people grow and become leaders and professionals and competent in their lives, and they derive a lot of value from there. But we are not teaching enough emotional awareness, and we are not providing. I don't like this term, but I'm going to use it. Safe spaces for people to air out what's really going on in a way that just isn't these one-on-one. Hey, meet the peer support worker in this room in the basement kind of way. And it's just like what I'm starting to realize, man, is like, it's one thing to be in those moments and have a conversation and let it all out, just like your employee did with you. It's another thing for someone else to overhear that same conversation and be enormously empowered by it. And we don't get there until we start having these things just like out in plain view, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think one of the ways that we fail our children is by not teaching them how powerful they really are. And I think that, you talk about safe spaces, and I understand what you mean. Not the typical way the word is described, but a safe place to be yourself. And that is a gift that every single person has to give to another human being. We all have the power to help another person feel safe, to be themselves and to be honest and authentic. And that is so massively powerful in potentially changing people's lives. And we all possess that power. And it's like, we don't teach our kids that we have it.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
I talk to my kids all the time about that. Like for example, my daughter, I know we're running low on time here, so I'll wrap up quickly, but my daughter, at the 2-year anniversary of her telling me she was disappointed in me, I was actually with her and I pulled over in the car. I was taking her to get figure skates. And I said, you probably don't even remember this moment because you were 9, but you having the courage to be honest with me gave me the courage to be honest with myself. And I will forever be grateful to you, because you at 9 years old changed the trajectory of your 41-year-old dad's life. And
wow.
It was because you had the courage to be honest. And I don't even know how to thank you for that, but just always remember you are powerful. You are so powerful, and I wish if kids understood that, the world would be a different place. Man.
Wait, don't leave me hanging. What did she say? Did she remember?
Well, so yeah, no, she didn't. But however, the interesting thing is, on that day, so just to give you a quick backstory, on that day, it was going to be a day with just the two of us, daddy, daughter date. My wife and older daughter were going out, and I had made it, it was going to be this special day, just the two of us. Had really hyped it up. And then when the day rolled around, I just got completely fucking shit-faced all day, and she played by herself. But I told her I was going to make her feel really special. And so on that day, 2 years later, the way she responded to that was by looking me in the eye and saying, Daddy, you just made me feel really special.
Wow.
Oh yeah, I get choked up every
Oh
time I talk
man,
about it,
that's
man.
beautiful. And that's all that it takes, right? You pulling over the car for 3 minutes to say that.
Yeah.
This is the thing, and I mean, we're coming down to a good solid ending here. Like, this is the thing that if I think about the most important moments in my life with other people, it's been those touch points where in 2 minutes, in 3 minutes, in 5 minutes, you help people either feel validated for who they really are, really special for the moment that you're having with them, or otherwise just not feel alone. And so often we don't create those moments because we're busy, we're doing stuff, we're hustling, we got errands to run, we got all this shit going on, the kids yelling and screaming, whatever, right? But just stopping and taking stock of it has the ability to change everything. And I'll leave you with this, man. Like, my world started to change when one person I didn't know terribly well took a huge bet on me and cared enough to pull out of me what was really going on. And like, basically, like, it sat me down, was like, dude, I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's really going on in your mind right now. And he sat there and he listened. And we get really romantic sometimes and we say that moment, those moments change our lives. The reality is that no single moment can really change our lives too often. There are some that do, but more often than not, that's not the case. But what does happen in those moments is anytime you can like help one person realize that they're not alone, all of a sudden they have the same ability to say, well, if there's one person like me that gets it, maybe there's two, maybe there's three, maybe there's four, all the way up to, oh shit, maybe the world isn't as scary as I think it is. Maybe there's not a huge reason to be afraid to be me. Maybe everyone's struggling with the same things that I am. And if you keep that mindset day to day, and if you lean into those opportunities to have those interactions, like, that is where the real beauty is. And so, dude, I commend you for creating those. That, like, there's very, very few things in life that are more special than that.
I could not agree more, brother, and that's a perfect place to end it. So listen, man, I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I knew I would, but I think I enjoyed it even more than I thought I would. So what is the best way for people to follow you, find out what you're doing, or get in touch with you?
Sure, man. That's always a moving target. So in terms of the educational programming piece, you can find all of our information at disrupt.com. That's disrupt with two T's. I didn't name the company. Every time I say it, it makes me feel like I'm like a member of like a 90s like screamo band or something. But disrupt.com with two T's. Otherwise, I'm launching a bunch of different courses and online education components, largely for business leaders and entrepreneurs around a lot of the same stuff we've talked about later this summer. And that's going to be at myname.com, jordanexani.com. So yeah, and I mean, I love getting emails from people sharing what's going on. So if you have any thoughts or ideas or want to jam, send me a note and we'll rock it out.
Amazing. Thank you, brother.
Dude, thank you. This is awesome.
Thank you to Jordan for that amazing conversation and for doing what you're doing, man. God, you are changing the world in a profound way at a huge scale. And it's really an honor to be able to watch what you're doing and to call you a friend and to be able to have had the time to spend with you today. And remember, I want you to ask yourself the question, what's your big lie? Because I am telling you, if you can find the courage to turn that big lie into your ultimate truth, you will be liberated and you will make a powerful and enduring contribution to the world. And lastly, I want you to remember, and I'm saying this as the guy who basically was crippled with anxiety yesterday and almost paralyzed. That's what it felt like. So I'm speaking from personal experience here, but I want you to know that if you have struggled, I have also struggled. And if you ever want to talk to me, I want you to know, and I promise you, that I will not judge you. I hope you loved this week's episode, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for tuning into this week's episode. For more shows and resources, head on over to mentalhealthwarriors.com.